All right, hi guys. Welcome to tonight, Evidence of God for Skeptics. This is our fifth session that we've been going through this, showing evidence for God. Tonight we're talking about the moral law and talking about miracles. Again, my name is Fred. Anything I say tonight, don't hold to be true. I want you to do your own research, right? I'm telling you what I found, the evidence I found, right? But do your own research, look into it on yourself. Don't just take my word for it. A lot of the materials you find will be that I'm covering is from the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's a great book. It's an easy read. Dr. Norman Geisler and Dr. Frank Turek. I have other books that I pull from, but this is the primary course, kind of the book that we're following overall as an overall outline. So you'll see a lot of references from there. I've updated the session count because I've combined a couple of things. So right now we're on session 5 of 9. 5 of 9. The first half of these was focused on proving that there is a God. The second half will be focused on, okay, now that we know there's a God, why is it the God of the Bible and not some other God? So the moral argument. First, let's cover the first two arguments we have so far. The cosmological argument. The argument is that everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe had a beginning, as both atheists and non-atheist scientists agree. Therefore, the universe had a cause. And we believe that cause to be God. The teleological argument states that every design has a designer. The universe is a highly complex design, and therefore the universe had a designer. And we went a little bit deeper with the design argument into the origin of life, additional evidence of design, and a stronger evidence of a designer. And then we talked about also macroevolution. Not that macroevolution would disprove God if it was true, but that the science shows there's no science to support macroevolutions, and we went into that in the first four sessions. So the first four sessions were very scientific, tangible, physical evidence that you could look at, data that you could look at. This session is a little bit different. This session is a philosophical argument. It's different than the previous ones which were scientific based. Right? There are things that science can't prove. Science cannot prove mathematics and logic. Science can't prove metaphysical truths, such as, are there other minds that exist other than my own? Science can't prove ethical judgments, or science can't prove science itself. So there are things that science can't prove, and moral argument kind of falls into one of those. The argument here is that every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. Another way to put it is, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore you'll see this referred to, sometimes people refer to this as conscience or as nature's law, right? You don't need evidence to discover this thing. You intuitively know it, but without an objective standard to measure against, then it's just a matter of opinion. So is there at least one morally wrong thing? Is there at least one thing that's morally wrong? Right? Is it wrong to torture babies for fun? Was it wrong for Hitler to murder 6 million Jews? Was it wrong for Stalin to execute over 20 million people? If it's wrong, then there is a God. Otherwise, there's no standard for us to measure against beyond humanity. If there's no standard beyond our own, then it's just your opinion versus Hitler's opinion. Right? If there is no standard outside of humanity, then it's just your opinion versus mine. Right, so let's define some of these words of objective versus subjective. Objectively, subjectively. So subjective is something that's based on your personal feelings, your taste, your assumptions, your beliefs, or opinions. That's subjective. That's what we mean by morally subjective. It's based on your opinion. Something objective is based on an object. It's not based on human, it's based on an object. It's not influenced by personal feelings or opinions. Right? It's backed by some type of analysis or facts or evidence. So sometimes you might hear people like to say, facts don't care about your feelings, right? They're saying in a rude way, basically, you're saying something subjective that's based on your feelings, not something that's objective based on actual hard evidence. About 6 years ago, 2015, somewhere around there, Tiffany, my wife, and I went to Israel. We were there for 2 weeks for a tour, and we went all over Israel, and it was an amazing experience. Near the end of the tour, we ended up going to the Holocaust Museum and seeing the things they had there. The Jews, they built this amazing looking Holocaust museum, and we found them there. One of the exhibits was a huge pile of shoes, It wasn't this image, but it was a huge pile of just shoes from all the people that were killed during the Holocaust. Right? It wasn't all of them, but it was a substantial amount. Right? People that were killed, that were murdered, that were dehumanized. Right? We have a disturbing, horrific picture here from the Holocaust, right? From a concentration camp. Right? This we know to be evil. This we know to be morally wrong. Right? It's wrong to murder. It's wrong to take a life. Yet, if there is no God, this being wrong is simply your opinion versus Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard to measure against, this isn't evil. This is just your opinion. Right? Who's right? Who's wrong? Is Hitler wrong? And Mother Teresa's right? Right? How do we know one is more right and one is less right? How do we know one is more evil and one is less evil? Right? Without something to measure against. Right? Another way to put it, another example we have, for example, here's a map. Here's maps of Scotland. Map A and map B. One of these maps is more right, one of these maps is more wrong. So I'm going to ask out loud, if someone shout out. So map A, map B, one's more right, one's more wrong. What would you need in order to know which one is the more correct map? What do you need? Yes, you need a higher, that's true. What else? Yeah, the actual map of Scotland, right, the original. We'd have to know what that standard is that we're measuring against, right, to know which one of these maps is more right or more wrong, right? And so when we look at the real map of Scotland, right, we can see that map A is closer to that than map B. Right? And it's the same thing with evil and good and evil in the world. You know something is evil because you're comparing it against something that's ultimately has a standard, ultimate standard, and that standard is God. Right? God's moral nature is the thing we're measuring against. We're measuring Sister Teresa, Mother Teresa, against that standard. We're measuring Hitler against that standard, and we're saying, where do these measure up against that standard? The standard can't be us. The standard can't be something we just come up with, and it can't be subjective. It has to be an objective standard beyond us that we measure evil against, that we measure actions against, in order to determine whether it's more evil or less evil. Right? We're measuring against God's law. The ultimate thing of goodness, the ultimate standard would be God. If there's no objective morality, if morality is subjective or morality is relative to the person, that means the Nazis were not wrong. That means love is no better than rape. That means freedom is no better than slavery. Right? That means tolerance is no better than intolerance. That religious crusades are not wrong. Right? There's evil in the world. But how do we know there's evil in the world? Right? If we don't have an objective standard, you can't complain about evil. You can't complain about the problem of evil because evil, right, would be just subjective. C.S. Lewis has an example with a fish. A fish doesn't have a word for water because a fish is in water. That's its life. It doesn't know anything outside of water. Like, its natural habitat is living in water. Right? Maybe if you take the fish out of water and back in, then it realizes there's a difference. If there was no objective standard, we wouldn't know unjustness. We wouldn't know just from unjust. That would just be life. He got killed. I shot him. Big whoop. Who cares? Right? But we know intuitively, the Bible says it's been written on our hearts. God has written on the hearts the moral law of man. Right? And so we know intuitively we know it's wrong to take life because we are measuring against a standard that's beyond us, and that law has to have been given in some way. C.S. Lewis used to be an atheist, right? And we like to, evil requires good, good requires evil. Requires God. Evil requires good, good requires God. And C.S. Lewis, in his older years, eventually became a Christian. And what led him to becoming a Christian was actually this thought of what we're talking about tonight. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? And that actually started him down the journey of becoming a Christian, because he realized the only reason why I know the world is so unjust and there's so much evil in the world is because there's some standard that I'm measuring against. Prove the sunshine. Right? Shadows prove the sunshine. You can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. Right? You can't have evil without good. Right? Evil does not disprove God. Evil might prove there's a devil out there, but doesn't disprove God. Right? Another way to put it is evil is like rust in a car. If you take the rust out of the car, what do you get? A better car. If you take the car out of the rust, what are you left with? Nothing. Right? So you can't have evil unless you have good. And you can't have good or more standard of good without having God. Right? There would be no evil unless there was a standard of good. Right? We know it's evil because we're measuring against something. So let's clarify some things. What we're not saying, we are not saying that atheists cannot be moral. Right? We're not saying that. They can be moral, and some are better than Christians. There are atheists I know that are better at morality than Christians, some better than even me. Right? We are not saying atheists don't know morality. They do know morality. Right? You don't need to know the Bible to know what is right from wrong. Right? It's written on our hearts. What we are saying is atheists cannot justify morality. They can theorize about how we know murder is wrong, but atheism provides no immaterial objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. Right? There's a difference between knowing morality and why it's wrong. Right? Knowing something is epistemology. Epistemology is how you know something. Example, we know murder is wrong. Right? That can be taught to you. Our parents, you learned it from your family, from your neighbors, wherever you've learned it from. Ontology is why is murder wrong? Right? What law? Why is that a thing? Why is that a law? Where did that law come from? Right? You can't get a law from biological processes. Through chemical reactions over a given time of natural chemical reactions over billions of years does not create a moral law in any way. Another way to put it is in a multiplications table. You were taught the multiplications table in school. That's epistemology, right? That's how you know something, how you've come to learn something. But why do the multiplication tables exist in the first place? That's ontology, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how did the moral law come into existence in the first place. There must be a standard beyond us. Right? You can learn morality, but why is murder wrong? Right? An immaterial objective standard of justice requires a theistic God. There has to be a God in order to measure against. Otherwise, it's just chemical reactions versus reasoning. Right? If there is no God, and we're all just chemical reactions, right? God didn't create us. We all came spontaneously into life by accident. We formed over millions of years into these things called human bodies and beings. So where did the moral law come from? Right? Nature can't create the law. Right? Nature can't create the law. Another way to look at it is our reactions help us discover the moral law. What you'll find is that moral relativists will like to say, well, it's okay for me to steal from you because morality is subjective to me, right? But the minute you steal from them, suddenly it's unjust. Suddenly it's wrong, right? You kick them in the leg, they're going to get mad at you. Why? Because it's a natural instinct. That was unjust. You kicked me for no reason, right? I demand justice, right? Their reaction should lead to that morality. Dr. Frank Turk has a good a story he tells. A professor gives his students homework for the week, and he says, you have to write a 20-page paper on ethics and morality, and you have to hand it in by this date, at this time, and off you go. And one of the students writes a great paper, and he says you got to reference everything. He references everything, hands it in a professional blue binder, on time, on the right date, and he loves it. It's a great paper. He submits it. The professor later in class hands back his graded report or paper, and he writes F. I don't like blue. Right? And the student gets upset. So after class, the student is mad, is upset, goes to see the professor. He's like, you failed me. You said because you don't like blue? That's not fair. That's not right. And the professor was like, which paper was yours? I graded a lot of papers. Was yours the one on morality is subjective? And he said, yes. And he goes, well, F. I don't like blue. And the student said, you can't do that. It's not fair. And then it clicked. Right? If morality is subjective, then you fail. I don't like blue. Right? But he immediately felt unjust. The student immediately felt angered about it. That's not right. What are you comparing that to? It's just your opinion versus my opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. Who cares? right? Because there is a standard of morality that we're comparing against. Some things to clarify, because sometimes when we talk to people, they like to clarify things, or they like to they'll talk about certain events that might seem a little bit confusing. So let's talk about some of those. Absolute versus changing behavior and perceptions. What people do changes. What they ought to do does not change, right? Everyone makes mathematical mistakes. That doesn't mean that there's no unchanging rules of mathematics, right? If you make a moral mistake, that doesn't change the moral law. Absolute morals versus changing perceptions. Back in the 1700s, we used to burn witches at the stake, right? And if you talk to some of our more relatives, they might say, we don't burn witches today. See, morality is subjective. But think about the why they were burning witches at the stake. Think about if today there was a group of people running around outside in town, cursing people, turning people into frogs, doing all kinds of things, killing people. What would we do? We'd round them up and we'd get rid of them, right? We'd put them in jail, on the death penalty, whatever it was, because they're causing chaos and killing people and cursing people, right? If you go back now, the reason why we don't do it is because we know witches can't do those things. But back then, they honestly believed that to be true. The moral law didn't change. They were burning witches at the stake because they honestly believed that witches were cursing people and causing them to turn into frogs or whatever, and getting rid of people and killing people. So they were doing what they felt was more. They were adhering to the moral law, but they had wrong information. Right? As we got smarter, we realized, oh, they can't do that. So we don't burn witches anymore because we know they can't do anything. Right? So it doesn't change. So the perception changes, but the moral law did not change. Or they'll apply more. What about absolute morals versus a particular situation? So if we fail to know the right thing to do in a particular situation and come to different conclusion, that doesn't make morality subjective. Right? As an example that they'll give students in schools, they'll say, you have 5 people on a 4-person life raft. It only fits 4 people. You got 5 people on there. You have to throw somebody overboard in order for everyone else to survive. What do? And now there's a dilemma. And now the students are like, well, who do we throw? If you throw one person overboard and they drown and they die, you have to kill somebody to save everybody else. But we want to try to save people. And what do? And there's a dilemma. And they're stuck in this dilemma. And they might come up with different solutions. And so not thinking about it clearly, a moral relativist will say, see, morality is subjective. Right? It's not subjective. Why are you having a dilemma in the first place anyway? Because you're trying to save all the lives. Because it doesn't mean nothing just to throw somebody over the board and let them die. Your dilemma is the moral law is causing your dilemma. The fact that you're even having a dilemma proves the moral law. Because you're trying to find a way to save everyone's life. Just the fact of saying this is evil, that should not be right, proves the moral law. There's also something they use, something we call absolute command of what versus relative culture of how. So this is the moral values absolute. How it's practiced is relative. The example is, all around the world, there's many different ways to greet somebody in love and respect. Right? That's the moral value. It doesn't change from culture to culture. You're greeting someone with love and respect. How they practice it changes. Some cultures shake hands, some bow, some kiss on the cheek, some kiss on both cheeks. Right? So sometimes that gets confused with, morality is relative because they do it different than these people. Right? It's not relative. Even, they'll throw up, there's a lot more in the book, but they'll throw up, even cannibalism. Well, they eat humans, right? Morality is subjective to them. If you look into and research cannibalism, one tribe has to dehumanize another tribe. They have to convince everyone else in the tribe that tribe is not human. They are subhuman. That's the same thing Hitler did with the Nazis in Germany. He dehumanized the Jews before moving to the stage of killing them. Then when the cannibals do kill a human and take life after they've dehumanized them, they go through a whole ritual process to try to make amends for doing so. They don't just whatever, just kill them and eat them. No, it's a whole ritual because they know intuitively that they shouldn't be doing that. Right? That they should not be doing that. Without an objective source of morality, right, with no God, then what Hitler did is a matter of just opinion. Right? If at least one thing is morally wrong, like it's wrong to torture babies, then God exists. Because there's a standard we're comparing against that's beyond us. In the end, atheism cannot justify why anything is morally right or wrong. They cannot guarantee human rights or ultimate justice, right? To be a consistent atheist, because you find atheists that try to change depending on the scenario, and they'll try to steal from God. But to be a consistent atheist, you have to believe that there is nothing really wrong with murder, rape, genocide, torture, or any other heinous act. By faith, you have to believe that there is no moral difference between a murderer, a missionary, a teacher, a terrorist, Mother Teresa, or Hitler. By faith, you have to believe that real moral principles arose out of nothing. Such beliefs are so clearly unreasonable that we don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And so that's the conclusion of the moral law. Now I want to move into, to bring it all together from the sessions that we've talked about. So the characteristics of the Creator. We talked about the cosmological argument. The universe had a beginning, right? Therefore, the universe came into existence. Time, matter, and space all came into existence at once. Atheists and non-atheist scientists all agree. We went through the evidence. Therefore, the cause of the universe had to be timeless, outside of our time domain, because time came into an existence at the same time. It had to be immaterial, not part of this universe, not made of this matter. Had to be spaceless, because even space came into existence at the same time. Extremely powerful, right, in order to create this universe. And personal, because before the universe there was nothing, right? And science has showed that there was nothing prior to the universe. Nothing can't create something. So something had to make a choice to create the universe. And the only people that create choices are persons. Right, so it had to be a personal being, the creator, whatever created the universe. And then we went to the teleological argument. Had to be extremely intelligent to design the universe as it is. And with the anthropic principle, it appears to be designed just for human life. The fact that it was created means there's a purpose, right? And we're here for a reason. This creator has a purpose of why they did what they did. Moral argument that we talked about tonight. Right? This person is absolutely morally perfect, right? And more reinforced reason for a personal creator, because we only have moral objections against other persons, not against things, right? We don't have moral objections to how we treat a basketball, but how we treat other people. So the creator is immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, personal, extremely intelligent, purposeful, and morally perfect. Right? What we have is the God of biblical Christianity described. Now, I'm not saying that it's you don't need to open a Bible, right? But you get the biblical version of God, right? Based on the science, based on the evidence. Now, I'm not saying Christianity is true yet, right? But up until this point, through the sessions, we can show that there is a God, there is a theistic God, someone who created it all, right? And the characteristics happen to match exactly what the Christian Bible teaches. But based on the evidence today, we're simply stating that there's a theistic God. Right? Later sessions, we'll talk about why it's Christianity. To go back to the major religions we talked about in the first session, theism, right? That means God made all. So based on all the evidence, it has to be a theistic God. The only major religions that fall under that category are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All other religions, pantheism and atheism, don't fit the bill. Now, we're not saying what things that they say aren't true. We're not saying the things they teach are all false. What we're saying is that their baseline of a God, when it comes to the existence of the nature of God, theistic religions are the only ones that have it correct. That means if it's a theistic God that we've proven through science, that means all non-theistic religions cannot be true. Now, things they say might be true. Some of the things they say might be true and might be good teachings, but their God, the premise of the God that they preach, is false. That's Hinduism, Buddhism, New Age, secular humanism, Mormonism, Wicca, Taoism, Confucianism, and Shinto. Right? Some people question why Mormonism is in there, because Mormonism teaches a polytheistic God. Everyone eventually can become gods and own their own planets and rule their own worlds. That's a polytheistic religion, not a theistic, monotheistic religion. So, which is true? Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? Maybe none of them are true, right? That's possible. It could be that none of them are true, up to this point anyway, based on the evidence, right? But we know they have theism to true, but maybe nothing else is true in those religions. But if God existed, right, and wanted to tell us which one is true, he could maybe do something about it in the form of possible miracles. But first we have to think about, are miracles possible?